So, unfortunately, one of the things that India is very famous for is its level of poverty. So, the world over knows that many people in India are suffering from this problem, and India for a long time has tried to fight against this issue, and they're hoping to get out of this situation. So, what it is that they want to do is to be able to eliminate poverty, but do so in such a way whereas they haven't put any restrictions on firms and allowed people to still operate freely in society. So one of the four ways they've decided that they need to go about this is either by accelerating the pace of economic growth through fiscal and legislative measures, through population growth, which is something similar to what you studied about China previously, and other measures to enhance life quality. So let's take a look first at accelerating the pace of economic growth. Well, simply said, when there is growth or when growth occurs in a society and GDP is rising, employment opportunities increase, which leads to less poverty. There is one important caveat, however. Growth has to be not of the jobless nature. And what does that mean? So jobless growth is this term, which means we can increase GDP without increasing jobs. And a famous recent example is driverless cars. So Google wanted to implement a driverless car system in India, but the Indian government said, you're not allowed to use that technology in our country, because if you do, probably thousands or millions even of taxi drivers will eventually be out of jobs. And that means growth will occur, but it'll be jobless growth, and then we'll just have more poverty. The second thing the Indian government can do is use fiscal and legislative measures to its advantage. What are fiscal measures? Well, they include tax and subsidies, progressive taxes, and a whole bunch of different things. And these are all financially related incentives to ensure that people work more. Legislatively, they can put laws into place like the Minimum Wages Act or the price floor or the right to education, so as to ensure legally people will have better opportunities at work. So let's just very quickly take a look at some of these. So taxation and subsidies. If you reduce the taxes for firms who hire more employees, that could be one way you could actually ensure firms hire more individuals, leading to more output and then hopefully greater sales and then a greater impact on GDP on a national scale. You could offer subsidies, which would mean the government would pay a firm to engage in some sort of economic behavior. On the legislative side, the Minimum Wages Act, which is enacted in mostly every developed country in the world, the government guarantees that employees will have a certain minimum wage if they are employed. A price floor means prices cannot be below a certain level. And then the right to education would mean that each of the citizens have an obligated time that they have to go to school. I believe in Japan, it is until the age of 16, you're legally obligated to attend school. And that's why the literacy rate in this country is virtually 100%. So doing these things, the government can actually promote growth because its population could be highly educated. It could ensure that once its workers enter the workforce, they could have a fair wage. The prices they would pay for goods would not be too high, and firms could be incentivized through taxation and subsidies to increase employment opportunities. Next, let's take a look at population control. Well, India has had a unique problem. The unique problem is that although GDP growth has occurred, population growth in this country is absolutely rampant. And as a result of that, the GDP per capita growth seems marginal at best. And since population is rising rapidly, the employment opportunities for each individual are decreasing. So if India puts a cap on the population, for example, instituting China's one-child policy, then the number of people in society over time will start to decline, or the growth of the population rather would start to decline. And as GDP continues along its current track, that would mean GDP per capita would actually rise and each individual in society would be better off. This is something we're going to discuss in class, and I'm going to put this question to you. Do you think it's a good idea for India to control its population through a similar method as employed by China? Next, some of the other measures used to control poverty include the development of the agricultural system, which we've seen they've tried to do in some ways. Stability in the price level. Eradication of unemployment, which is a very, very noble but hard to achieve goal. labor-intensive production. Well, if we've eliminated jobless growth, then that could take care of some of this. The provision of minimum needs for the poor. So in Japan, we have a system known as a welfare system. If you're unable to provide for the basics for your life or for your family, the government provides you a certain stipend every month with which you can use to consume the basic necessities of life. Focus on backwards regions. So the Indian government will go in and invest time, effort, and money in areas that are less educated with lower employment opportunities. Create opportunities for self-employment, which is pretty straightforward. Give individuals access to capital so that they can start their own business. And effective public distribution systems, which is a tall order in a country as corrupt as India. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the measures the Indian government has used to try to remove poverty. On the first of these slides, we're going to talk about a number of different measures. Now, each of these names is quite complicated, very, very difficult to remember. So what we're going to do is we're going to just use the abbreviations. So the first one, we're going to call it just SGSY. The SGSY program was launched in April 1999, and it replaced other programs in the past. But this program's purpose was designed to help a large number of small enterprises in rural areas. Next, the NRLM. This scheme was implemented in 150 districts in 2012. It was employed throughout India, and it was expected to help provide self-employment opportunities to 90 lakh persons. Following that, we have SGRY, which was launched in September of 2001, and it was designed to increase the employment opportunities for India's surplus workers, which means the unemployed. It also focused on development of regional and social conditions within a given local community, and it tried to focus on increasing infrastructural development. But that's not all. There are a few more that we're going to talk about. On the next slide, we have PGY, which was started in 2001, and it focused on improving the conditions in 5 different areas. It wanted to improve the standard of living for rural people in the areas of health, education, drinking water, housing, and roads, especially those for villages of greater than 500 people. Next, we have JPRGY, and this scheme was designed to guarantee employment opportunities to those in the most backwards of districts. Following that, we have SJSRY, which was launched in 1997 on December 1st. And the agenda here was to increase urban self-employment opportunities and the urban wage employment program. Following that, we have some other measures, which are known as PMRY, and the PMRY, which provided loans of up to 1 lakh to those who are opening their own small enterprises and up to 2 lakh for other types of development. Next, we have DSCI. And DSCI was the development of small and cottage industries, which are special measures taken by the government to ensure that poverty and unemployment would not spread rampant through these industries, which were basically related to tourism. Next, we have the MNP, which is the Minimum Needs Program, and this is to ensure that the standard of living of the poor is at some threshold where they're able to provide themselves with the essentials of life. Following that, we have the 20-point program, and the 20-point program is actually all-encompassing. It was established in 1982 on January 14th, and it wanted to eradicate poverty through a wide number of areas, 20 unique areas. And unfortunately, in this program, as with all the other programs, there aren't many details provided about how these programs are actually implemented. Following that, the last one here, we have the MGNREGS. This program was designed to guarantee employment opportunities to those who are willing to work for minimum wage for at least 100 days of the year. Unbelievably, this program was able to assist 4.78 crore people. That's very, very impressive. So, what has happened here? Well, let's take a look at the results. Poverty has fallen from 55% in 1973 to 21.9% in 2011. But let's be honest, these statistics seem suspicious at best. Were the methods used to calculate poverty in 1973 the same as those used in 2011? If the population level has rapidly expanded, as the textbook has said, and GDP growth has not increased significantly, how has poverty fallen by more than half? I would take this information with a grain of salt. Next, it also argues wages have substantially increased. It also argues that wages have substantially increased. Well, that may be so, but I think even though wages have substantially increased, so have costs. And what are the areas that the Indian government acknowledges they need to improve? Well, they're plentiful. First, there are mass inefficiencies. Secondly, the rich still get treated better than the poor. Third, there are inaccessibility issues, which means a lot of individuals, are unable to get equal access to employment opportunities. Next, private sector often doesn't follow the rules set up by the public sector or the government. So how to implement these issues or these laws and rules is a big problem. Next, what is the definition of somebody who is poor? The Indian government hasn't answered this simple question. Most countries set a poverty line, and once somebody falls below that poverty line, if they meet a certain number threshold or criteria, they're eligible for support. But in India, it seems that the definition of being poor is very, very vague, and unfortunately, even the textbook doesn't define what poor means. Next, government funds are mismanaged, which is the case with every developing nation. Low levels of participation, I suppose this is primarily because of a lack of hope or faith that opportunities will exist to help me get out of poverty. And then the last one, which is a big problem, the lack of awareness and focus. The government creates the programs, but people don't know they exist. So if they don't know if the programs exist, how can they take advantage of them? So as you can see, the issues surrounding poverty here are plentiful, and the Indian government has lots to do to improve this situation, and what they've done thus far hasn't made a dent in this whatsoever.